your fresh and unbiased voice in American politics. Hey guys, welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the final 2020 presidential polls and take a look at what that means for this election. What are the polls indicating? And what are the chances of these things that the polls are indicating materializing into the actual election results? But before we get started, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. So let's get started. So for these last polls that we have, we're seeing a big influx of polls as we get closer to the end of quote-unquote election eve, as I'm quoting this today's date. It's the night before the election as I'm filming this. And at this point in time, it's not looking too great for President Trump, both national and a state-by-state level. However, keep in mind these polls were wrong in 2016 to certain extents. And I think that's something we must keep in consideration because, overall, the data has become a lot less unreliable. Or more unreliable. In recent years, they were pretty spot on in 2012. They were pretty spot on in 2008. However, in 2016, they weren't on the spot. So something to keep in mind. However, I think at this point in time, we're starting to get a national perspective, and usually the most accurate polls are those that come right before the election. At this point, it's these polls that we're taking October 31st, November 1st. These are the polls that are going to matter for this election. So let's start by taking a look at the national average that 538 puts forward. At this point in time, the national average puts Joe Biden ahead, 8.4%. The night before the election. These are very strong numbers for the former vice president. And an 8-point lead over an incumbent president it's ridiculous. If Biden actually wins by this margin tomorrow night, the Democrats are probably going to have a wave, not only in the presidency, but also in the Senate and gain seats in the House, which right now they're expected to lose some seats, perhaps. However, I think at this point in time, Joe Biden is performing exceptionally well. We're seeing him with good leads, at the nationwide polls. And if you take a look at individual polls, there's God knows how many polls today because it's the last day and you start seeing a lot of that big influx of polls. YouGov, constantly polling, 10 plus 9, and you're seeing it consistently, plus 8, plus 10. If you take a look at some other polls, a recent poll that's more of a Republican-leaning poll has Biden up +1. Seems like an outlier at this point. But we are definitely seeing some polls by IBD. We're seeing other polls, that have the race a little bit closer. And at this point, at a national level, I think it becomes very clear that Biden's probably going to be the winner of the popular vote. Keep in mind, with the popular vote, it doesn't really matter. It's an indicator. And at this point, the national polls are heavily indicating that Biden might have a victory by big margins at a nationwide level. Again, there's other factors, so this is not necessarily that in the swing states are voting for Biden by these huge abnormal margins, but rather that the blue states have gotten bluer and they have a lot more population that's voting blue, and the red states have gotten redder, or actually less red. That is a difference we're seeing with the popular vote here. Truly, it's not going to have a big impact because if you would ask Hillary Clinton, she would be president today if the popular vote actually mattered. Now, going over to the polls that actually do matter and are a big indicator towards this election, we have the state-by-state polls, which in the key swing states, we've definitely seen the president rise a little bit over the last couple of days. It hasn't been something that's very remarkable. It's not been this huge surge that we are seeing. However, he has the momentum right now. The president has his momentum. If he can get out those GOP voters to vote, he might actually win this because he's within striking distance. Arizona, he's only behind by 2.6%. Let's take a look at some of the polls. Marist College poll has the even or +1 for Biden. ISPOS, +2 or +3 for Biden. Morning Consult, +2. The only big polls that we have here for Biden are the Morning Consult polls. Trump is within striking distance in Arizona, within the margin of error. Here they do not show you the margin of error, but I was taking a look at these polls early on today on RCP, and the margin of error generally falls between 3 to 5%. So at this point, Arizona, well within striking distance, not only in the average, but in the mostly in the reliable polls, but in most polls, Trump is within striking distance in Arizona. This is not as commanding of a lead as Biden had at other points during the election, where perhaps he was leading at the beginning of October when he had his big surge at the beginning of the month during like Trump's poor debate performance, at least in the polls, in his COVID diagnosis, where he was leading in Arizona +5. That has narrowed down, and you can see the momentum is on Trump's side. He was there today. Who knows what could happen? I mean, and you're seeing things like this happen all over the map. I mean, let's take a look at some other key states. Florida. This state has definitely narrowed up in the last couple of days. I mean, there was a point in this election where Biden was leading by 7.5%. It was ridiculous. I mean, you haven't seen a Democrat lead in Florida by this much in so long of time. However, I mean, it's narrowed up a lot. Donald Trump had a rally here today, or yesterday rather, in Florida. And Obama was here today. So we're seeing Florida be contested, and the Democrats are trying to lock up the map so Trump cannot even get through. Currently, polling averages +2.5 for Biden. If you look at the most recent polls, Quinnipiac puts it +5. I think it's a little exaggerated. Ipsos +4. We have Trump is not leading in any of the polls. And you're generally seeing an average of around 2, 5, 4%. Generally speaking, we saw some polls yesterday. The New York Times only posted up +3 for Biden. St. Pete's polls +1 for Biden. Emerson +6. So that's the general range that we're seeing with the state of Florida. This state is going to become crucial. If the Democrats can win here, consider it game over for the president. Consider it game over. And at this point in time, it's looking somewhat decent. I mean, it's only a very small lead. It's only 2.5%. Well within striking distance, especially in a state like Florida. It's very swingy, and many things are happening. Now, when you look at the state and the data that you have, early voting, excitement for the Republican Party in many areas of the state, it comes into question. Can Biden overperform these polls? And the night before the election, it's not looking too strong. However, it's definitely a possibility at this point in time. And I mean, we have a lot of these states that are going to end up being ridiculously close, and a lot closer, especially for the Republicans, than they would have thought. And this is where the great state of Georgia comes in. This state has become ridiculously close over the last couple of days for the Republicans. I mean, if you would have asked me back in March, when the beginning of the pandemic, or you would have asked me during the George Floyd protest, would have Georgia gone blue? I would have said in a best case scenario. But at this point for Joe Biden, it looks like it may happen in a regular scenario. However, since the polling lead is so small, it's only 1%, considering most margins of error, if we're just going to base it off of that, is 1%. Trump probably is going to win here. And he's leading in the polls, but we're seeing a +4 poll for Trump. We're not seeing that many good polls. We're seeing a lot of D-rated polls. +2 for Biden. Emerson had Trump +1. These better pollsters, they're putting Trump up. And this is as of recent. Before, I mean, if a week ago, Biden was doing a lot better, but this race has definitely narrowed down over the last couple of days, where we're seeing the president increase his like margins in the polls. He might as well win this state come tomorrow. He definitely has that possibility because he's such within striking distance. Now, being behind in Georgia, according to these polls, and again, these are polls, and again, the polling averages could differ from where you look at it. 530 usually like maybe moves the average a little bit, a couple points up for the Democrats. It's like in the tenths of like maybe 3/10 to 4/10. So keep that in mind. So this race is extremely close, and again, at this point in time, it's looking like a race that's definitely going to be close. And in Georgia, the Democrats are doing pretty well. I mean, if Biden has been leading for essentially all this past month, the night before the election, the Republicans are surging, and we're seeing similar trends in a lot of states. Is it this huge surge that's going to guarantee them an election night win? Probably not. However, we're seeing them surge last minute. What do we know from last minute surges? They usually work out, especially in politics. Going on to the state of Iowa, Biden was ahead 2 days ago, 3 days ago. He was ahead here, and it was looking like Iowa was going to go to Biden. It was ridiculous. I mean, for the Republicans, the map that was like in place about a week ago, based on polling averages, horrendous. It would have been blown out. However, we're seeing the president again get his game on campaigning. The Republicans are going full force. Democrats are actually surprisingly staying back and relaxing a little bit. They're not the Republicans. They have the need. They have the need to go and campaign 5 rallies a day. The Democrats, they can maybe do 2 or 3 events. The Republicans have to. And I mean, a recent surge in polls is probably based on that. I mean, they've been nonstop with those rallies. I mean, there's 5 rallies in a day while like the Democrats have a lot of circuits. The Democrats are depending a lot more on circuits right now. The Republicans are not. It depends on the different strategies. But for example, Trump had a rally in Iowa just a couple days ago, and he started leaning up again. He's plus 1.4. Take a look at the recent polls. We have a public policy polling that's more Democratic, plus 1. Survey Monkey is not a good poll. I never consider those, but those are plus 1 for Trump. Emerson, plus 1 for Trump. Insider Advantage, plus 2. You're seeing a Civic Q's poll for Biden, plus 1. And then we saw an A+, Seltzer and Co., plus 7 for the president. Again, strong numbers. And at this point in time, Iowa's a must-win. I mean, essentially it's not, but I think it's symbolic. If this goes blue, most likely means that other states that are less reliably blue or only go blue in very extreme scenarios will also go, which again hinges on the president's ability to win this election. And I mean, we're seeing a very clear trend here. The president is not, he did not do that well in the polls like before. However, last minute we're seeing him surge in certain parts of the country, in others not so much. Take a look at the state of Michigan. I mean, Michigan is a must-win for the president at this point, or one of them. He has options. He has to win at least one of those Midwest states, along with Arizona and then Florida and North Carolina to win the election. At this point, it's possible. Michigan was looking like it might have gone to Trump, maybe, just basing it off that he had a lot of support there, and the enthusiasm for the president was high. And if you looked at different things, I mean, it could have looked like the president was going to win in Michigan. It didn't look like Biden was up by 8 points. However, I mean, just a couple days before the election, Biden being up plus 8 is very, very good for the Democrats. If these numbers transfer onto election night, the Democrats are in for a very good night. I mean, take a look at some of the recent polls you have. I mean, of the good ones, we have Research Co. Plus 7 for Biden. For Trump, we have a Taglifer poll plus 3. Morning Consult, Biden plus 7. I mean, and essentially everything else, Emerson puts Biden plus 7. And you take a look at Ipsos, which is somewhat of a better pollster, plus 10. That is generally the range of things that we're seeing. We're seeing some polls, like mostly Telegraph group, that put it like a little bit more in favor of Trump. And we're seeing some A-rated pollsters actually put some polls for Trump. However, at this point in time, it doesn't look very likely for the president to win in these states. And truly, it's going to be hard for the president to win without winning one of these Rust Bowl states. Is it possible? It is, but mathematically speaking, but it's going to be very hard. And we're seeing a trend all over this Rust Bowl. It's going to be a tough election for the president. I mean, he's scrambling last minute. However, he is getting it done. Look how he's been going up in the polls. In the last month, he went up essentially from being down in Nevada, for example, by 7 points to now being only down by 4.8. We're seeing him increase. Is Nevada a possible pickup? Maybe. Not the most likely. You have a lot of Democratic voters here that would vote for Trump, Biden traditionally. However, I mean, we're seeing the polls actually narrow up a lot. Emerson yesterday had a poll plus 2. Trafalgar had a poll for Biden plus 2. And again, then you have some older or less recent polls. And again, this is a state that surprisingly has become pretty close for this election, because at this point in time, the race in Nevada is closer than it is in Michigan. This sounds completely insane again, and this is one of the things and the turns that this election has taken that you would have asked yourself, plausibly, will Nevada be closer than Michigan during this election year? It seemed like it wasn't going to be that way. And by looking at the polls, we can tell that is what could happen. I think, honestly, Biden could overperform these numbers in the state of Nevada. I think they're being a little bit less lenient with him. I mean, and these polls are kind of what the people respond to. And I think there's going to be, like, the polls are going to be off. I think we're going to have very few seats that are, like, almost spot on. However, I mean, Biden could overperform here. The president to win here, I mean, it's not a must win. But if he could win here, it would be nice adding to that electoral count. Now going on to this next state, which is state in North Carolina. This state has gotten pretty close. It's now by 2%. The furthest this state has been in favor of either candidate actually was back in middle of April or middle of March, around 3.5% for Biden. We saw similar leads replicate themselves just a couple of weeks ago. Right now, Biden is only ahead, plus 1.9. At this point in time, these are probably going to be where we're going to see the race fall off of. For example, it's almost a 2-point lead for Biden, essentially. And looking off the basis polls, we don't have one for Trump leading, except yesterday, where we had the Emerson poll at even. You had a ton of polls for Trump actually yesterday. And at this point in time, it doesn't look impossible. However, again, it is somewhat of an unlikely scenario for Trump to win here. It's possible, and I think actually taking into account some of the other things that we're seeing from this election, like voter turnout and the Republicans actually being excited, they're bringing on diversifying the party, taking away from the basket of Democratic voters. The Republicans have a chance in they're within striking distance, and they probably can win here. Right now, in my prediction, I put it for Trump. However, Biden could definitely win here, and he's ahead in the polls a day before the election. Again, take these polls with a grain of salt, because again, if these polls were 100% right in 2016, Hillary Clinton would be president today. Going on to the next state, which is a great state of Ohio, we're seeing the president be narrowly ahead here. He was doing pretty well, like after that second last debate. He was up plus 1.6 at his best point. He went down, and I mean, it was pretty even yesterday. Recent surge in polls for Trump have been like a lot better for him. We're seeing a ton of polls for him. I mean, you have two Tagliaferro polls plus 5 for Trump. You only have one Quinnipiac poll that's Biden plus 4. Research & Co. has Trump even. Yesterday, you had an Emerson poll which had Biden plus 1. But generally speaking, we're seeing a lot of consistent polls for Trump. This probably means that tomorrow we're going to see a Trump victory in the great state of Ohio. It's going to be a lot narrower than it was in 2016. However, think about it at this point in time. For the Republicans, anything they can get is a victory at this point. And I think that's going to be a recurring thing that we're going to be hearing all throughout tomorrow and, I mean, even today. So going on to the state of Pennsylvania, this state is the most crucial during this election. Whoever wins Pennsylvania is most likely than not going to become the next president of the United States. Either Trump gets reelected or Biden unseats Trump. The polls here have narrowed out somewhat. I mean, it's a 5-point lead for Biden. It's still pretty crucial. This state is what's giving Biden those big chances of winning the election. Now, I think at this point in time, this state could definitely go to President Donald Trump. He's not that far out from the margin of error. I mean, we had a ton of Marist and Monmouth polls. The tiniest lead was plus 4. Because plus 7, that's generally the area we're seeing. In Tagliaferro had poll for Trump plus 2. At this point in time, it's still a 5-point lead. However, I mean, considering margin of error 3.5%, if Trump is able to overperform the polls and have his quote-unquote silent majority, he could win here. These polls right now in Arizona or Pennsylvania, rather, they're very encouraging for the Biden campaign. Now, at this point in time, if Trump is able to overperform this, he might get reelected. And this state is the big barrier for Trump right now. He needs to win in the state of Pennsylvania. Going on to one of the last states, or almost last state, on this poll analysis is the state of Texas. This state has been very, very close. Voter turnout has been through the roof. And at this point, this state might do it or break it for Trump. I mean, this state, if Trump loses again, it's game over for the Republicans. They really have no pathway forward. However, right now we're seeing the president with a 1-point lead. Biden has been surging in recent polls. Biden has never held a long lead in Texas, other than like a week that he led back in the middle of July. However, right now it's looking very plausible for the president. He had a poll that was even, and then 2 unreliable polls had 2 completely different results. However, yesterday we saw Emerson poll, we saw Graves poll, all these different polls going for Trump. And at this point in time, it's looking somewhat a little bit more likely for the president that he could be able to win in the great state of Texas. And again, he needs to. It's a non-negotiable for the Republicans. And at this point in time, that is one of the closest states in this race, which again is surprising. Going to the last but not least, very crucial state of Wisconsin. Out of the Rust Belt states, this is probably the one that's scoring by the most margin, although I think it might be tied a little bit with Michigan by going by 8.2%. Again, this is almost like a must-win for the president. He could win here, Pennsylvania or Michigan. He has it in the bag. Now, this is not it's not very favoring. Pennsylvania is a lot closer and it's a lot more plausible, but this looks further away. And I mean, take a look at the most recent polls. Double-digit leads for Biden in these states. Siena College and New York Times, 11 points. You're seeing ABC poll. I mean, this was pretty big. I think this is an outlier personally. 17 points. I think that's probably not true. However, it could be. And if that ends up being the case, it's probably going to be a very bad sign for Trump at a national level. So overall, these are what the 2020 presidential polls look like. I mean, essentially the night before the election as we head towards what is looking to be a very contested election, as it's going to take the span of a couple of days to count, certify results, and project winners. But at this point in time, it truly is anyone's game. Biden has a lead in the polls at a national level. He narrowly has an electoral college lead. If you take a look at put the polls on the electoral map. At this point for Trump, it's essentially win Pennsylvania, you have the election, and win Arizona as well. It's for Trump. You win the election. However, there might be more to that, and we might be in for a very, very long counting period due to mail-in voting, and essentially long times because of the possible civil unrest that might occur come November 4th or 5th, when we have an uncertain political ecosystem in the U.S. where we won't know who our next president will be. That is definitely a possibility, and be prepared. And if you haven't voted yet, please go out and vote it tomorrow. Or if you're watching this on election day, go and vote today. And please make sure to vote for who you think will do the best for the country. And I mean, make your voice heard. That's a very big pillar of democracy. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. Please make sure to tune in for our election night coverage tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's going to be great, and we're going to have a very good time. Guys, hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.